It is Wednesday, October 28th, 2020. I'm Pastor Thor Ramsey with Center Church. This is Gospel for Five, where we take 5 minutes out of our day and focus on the gospel and the one who saved our souls, because Jesus is the gospel. Again, we've been going through Paul's letter to the Galatians line by line. We're in chapter 2, where the background story is. And the great thing about Galatians is all the teaching that comes out of Galatians comes from really a story that Paul's telling the Galatians. He tells them a little bit about his background to make a point in the incident that happened at the church there in Galatia, and all these teachings, all this doctrine of the gospel comes from that particular incident. So it's very interesting. So we're at this point in the story where Paul's gone up to the church in Jerusalem. He has Titus and Barnabas with him. He's presenting the gospel that he's been preaching to the Gentiles for 14 years, and he's looking to the leadership of the church in Jerusalem to affirm his message. He says, I proclaimed, he took to them, he presented before them the gospel that I proclaimed among the Gentiles, in order to make sure I was not running or had run in vain. I mentioned yesterday, here's the Apostle Paul, who wrote most of the New Testament. He's the one we look to make sure our gospel message is in line with the truth, and he's doing the same thing there among those with apostolic leadership. This is the gospel I've been presenting. Is this the true gospel? I want to make sure that you're preaching the same gospel, or that I'm preaching the same gospel that you're preaching, because it'll be a huge problem if we have two different gospels. So, but even Titus, who was with me, was not forced to be circumcised. So we can see one of the points of the gospel Paul's really talking about here is, we're going to see this more clearly as this letter unfolds, but one of the problems that the church in Galatia was having was with those who came in and said, yes, you have to believe in Jesus, but you also have to be circumcised. So Paul's letting the Galatians know that I went and I took the gospel that I was preaching to the Gentiles, right? I was preaching this gospel to the Gentiles, and I wanted to make sure that the church in Jerusalem, which was primarily Jewish, was preaching the same gospel that I was preaching. And it turns out I had a Greek with me, I had a Gentile with me, and the leadership of the church in Jerusalem, the Jewish believers there, didn't force Titus to be circumcised. That tells you something about the gospel just this far into this letter. And that is, you don't have to add anything to belief in Jesus in order to be saved. Again, the theme of Galatians can be boiled down to Jesus plus nothing. That's the gospel. Jesus plus nothing. If you have Jesus plus circumcision, Jesus plus baptism, Jesus plus anything, you have a different gospel. So that's why Paul was concerned that he's preaching the same gospel, but even Titus, who was with me, was not forced to be circumcised, though he was a Greek. So he's a Gentile believer, he's Greek, and the Jewish believers there don't say, well, to be a legitimate, true Christian, he needs to be circumcised, because, of course, all this blessing comes from the Jews. Yet because of false brothers secretly brought in, so Paul's saying these false brothers, these are not true Christians. These are false brothers who snuck in, they slipped in to spy out our freedom that we have in Christ Jesus. What's this freedom? Jesus alone. Jesus alone for salvation. Jesus plus nothing. These big law believers they were really false believers, crept in to spy out the freedom of the big grace Christians. We'll pick up there tomorrow. What's God said to you today?